So welcome back to the Woodgrafter part 2 in our mini-series of building this Bessey clamp rack. That sounds good? Stick around. So if you watched part 1, you'll know we're building this Bessey clamp rack to house my new collection of Bessey clamps. Now just so you know, the design for this was heavily inspired by a design by Timothy Wilmots over at Benchworks, and I'll leave a link to his website in his video. He's actually retired now, but I did get in touch to say, hey, I love your design, it's one of the best I've seen, I don't think I can better it, do you mind if I use it for my video? And he said, no, not a problem, carry on. So thank you for that, Timothy. Now in the last video, we'd got to the point where all the material had been cut to size, everything was milled down, all the joinery was done, and all the profile and the shaping was done. And we were turning our attention to these Velcro mat shelves. Let's pick up the action there and see how we get on. Now there's a variety of ways that you can do this. If you've got a dado stack, the perfect way of doing this is to make your dado stack the thickness of the groove that you want, and then raise it up to the height you want and just take that through. And all of these are on 60mm centers, so 60mm between this point and this point, or 60mm from this point to this point. And the 60mm centers is important because it allows you to put these things in sensibly and space everything out and have nice storage room. So the easiest way to do this is with a dado stack. Here in the UK, we don't have a dado stack, but you could do the same thing with a router, and you could just move this through a router at the appropriate height, or even lay this down. The other obvious way of doing it is just drill a series of holes at the end point of each groove and come through with a bandsaw or a jigsaw to bring it down to size. What I did, I just threw it on the CNC machine, and I just allowed the CNC machine to take the strain. But what's important on this is the size and the spacing. Now the large holes are obviously for taking the parallel clamps, and you can see the two clamps next to each other fit in very nicely, and you can see there's enough space in there so they're not banging together, which is what I want, of course. And then the quick clamps will just sit in the middle there and hang down quite nicely. So you can start to see the configuration that we've got with the clamps, and that maximizes the overall room. And it's that design feature I've copied with permission, because I really did like it. One thing I did slightly different than the original design is I've made these holes quite narrow. Now these larger holes here are around about 10mm, and these smaller holes are 7mm. Now I deliberately made these narrower than the original specifications because I've got these smaller clamps as well that I use an awful lot, and I wanted those to be able to sit into the rack too. So the 7mm will take the larger version of these and the smaller version of these. So I think 7's a good number. I think the original measurement was 9mm, which is great for these, not so good for these smaller ones, they fall out. So we're in good shape and we're ready for the glue up. Now the glue up on this is going to be a little bit tricky, because there's so many moving parts on it and so many awkward shapes now. So I'm going to glue up the left hand side of the frame first, just the end panels, middle panel, and some of the shelving, and then I'll bring that together, make sure that's all square, and then I'll glue up the right hand panel, and then I'll bring it together. I'm going to use a combination of clamping methodologies. I'm going to be using the Bessey clamps to bring it together, make sure it's all nice and square and firm. But once I've got it all assembled, I'm going to be using my strap clamps just to bring that in and hold it firm while it dries. I'm going to let all the main structure, all the shelving in the end middle panels go off first of all for a few hours, and then I'll come back in and I'll put the back on. And that way I think it's going to be easier to maneuver this thing around. Always I'm on Titebond 3 because I love it. I've got a damp cloth, and just in case I need it, a small little brush, and my hands are coloured in blue. So I want to start off with the left panel and the centre panel. Here we go. Obviously make sure that you glue this the right way up. This is the top with the curve on it, and that groove there, the cutout on that, wants to be facing upwards in that orientation, so just make sure that you do that correctly. And obviously these cutouts want to be facing the front of your stock. So I'm going to need 1, 2 shelves and a top shelf. Now because these joints are nice and tight, I can actually remove these clamps. So these clamps were purely to close up the joints for us. Nothing more. Now I want to start the clamp up of this end, or the glue up of this end. Sort of the same technique. We'll build the frame first of all and bring it together. Now obviously this is a lot harder because I can't clamp right down the post, so my clamps here are slightly offset, so I want to carefully just make sure that's seated, nothing more than that. Just light clamping pressure right on top of that joint, but being very careful because there's only 10mm between the shelf and the front, if you remember. And once that's in place, a little bit of light clamping pressure on here. Now what I'm trying to avoid is bowing this frame, because that would be so easy at this point. Now all those joints are now closed up. Once again, just want to check for square. We're looking good. So the Bessey clamps here were purely to close up those joints. What would have been an ideal if I had clamps that were long enough, but I don't. And I have ordered some clamp extensions for the Bessey clamps, but they've not come through yet, you know, which is Murphy's Law, isn't it? If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So what I'm going to do now is to come in with some of these straps, and I'm just sizing these up for length at the moment. I'm just making sure that the clamping pressure is throughout the length of these joints. Just checking these shelves are all square as I go. Whoa, them Bessey clamps are pretty heavy. So I'm just checking, final check that all my shelves are where I want them to be. Now, as we come to put the back on this, we do have a little bit of leeway to just twist the frame if it's not perfect, but what I like to try and do is to get this as perfect as I can at this juncture. And that, oops, yeah, and that's looking good to me. I then want to check that everything is nice and flush on the back, and it is, and all these joints are closed up. Now just here on this joint I've got a slight problem where there's a slight gap. I'm just going to come in with a couple of Besseys and just put a bit more clamping pressure across that joint to just bring it up to closed there and there. Otherwise I'll have a slight bit of twist in the frame that I don't want. Everything else is seated pretty well. Yeah, everything's looking really nice. I just want to check the front as well to make sure it's all looking how I want it to look. No gaps at the front. And again, that's looking pretty nice. In fact, it's looking super nice. I'm really quite happy with that. There's a slight gap just here on this one that I want to have a look at. I'm just going to do the same again on this front joint here. Just want to close it up a little bit. And you're not going mad on clamping pressure here, you're just purely adjusting things. Now, although everything is now looking square, we've still got the opportunity to just square things up a bit more once this is dry, because there are flecks in these black areas, these black shelves. So when we put the back on, we'll just make sure that everything's squared. You've not got much adjustment, you're talking fractions of a millimetre, but we can just twist the frame a little bit if we need to do so. Good, I'm in good shape. Then I'm going to let this go off now, leave it alone for a few hours, we'll come back together and we'll put the back on. I'll see you in a minute. So it's all out the clamps now and it's looking pretty good. Now that was quite a complicated clamp up that I did, and the reason it was complicated is I didn't have clamps that were long enough. If my clamps had been long enough, i.e. wider than the cabinet, I could have just simply put 3 clamps down, clamped it together, put 3 top clamps on the top and clamped that together, and it would have been a lot easier. But I had to work around the fact the clamps weren't long enough. Now Bessey clamps do have a clamp extension, which is how I'm going to get longer clamps in the workshop. That's the plan of using the Bessey clamps. And I've had some on order, but they weren't due to arrive till the back end of tomorrow, and I wanted to get this project finished. Now typically, I'd finished that glue up, I'd gone away to have a cup of tea, knock on the door, and the extensions arrived a day early but an hour late. If I knew they were coming today, I would have delayed that till this stage, and I would have had a much easier glue up. Can't win them all, can you? Anyway, we're in good shape. It's all square, it's all glued. The glue's not super hard just yet, so I still need to be a bit careful, but it's good enough to hold its shape. So I now want to put the back on. Now I have made a little bit of a boo-boo here, which is not unusual for me. These are cut too long because I'm going to trim them down. In the design, I actually designed the top part here of this back panel to come flush with the top of this black shelf, so it should sit like that. But if you remember, when I was weighing this up, I wanted to get a little bit of room to make it easier for the French cleat system, and that's why, you know, so my thinking was I was going to do it like this, but I forgot about this. I should have just followed the design, because what I'd actually done in the design, I'd allowed for this to be flush to the top. This piece actually comes 18 millimeters above these ends here, so the top shelf actually fits in with those back panels like so, and then that would come flush to the top, and there's enough gap in there to take it on and off the wall. So I'd actually already designed in that very problem I tried to solve again during the layout. Stupid of me. So a bit of a mistake there, but then again, we all make mistakes now and then, don't we? So this piece will fit nicely into the back here. This piece fits here. This piece then fits here 18 millimeters up, and then the top goes on here. All these pieces are all over length, so the first thing I want to do is to bring them down to size. So I'll work on the top panel first of all. I'm just flushing up here at the top, and then I can just take my pencil and that'll show me where I need to scribe it. Now doing it this way rather than trying to cut this to length and then praying that your glue up is good, it allows me to almost scribe that in to the ends so I get a good fit, which is what I'm looking for. Allowing for inaccuracies in my work. Just on the inside here, I'm just going to write A, and just here where that piece is going to go, I'm just going to write A as well, so I know that when I align the two A's together on that side of the work, flush it up to the end, it should all fit perfectly. Now I've got capacity for this cut on my Capex, so I'm just going to use the lasers on the Capex to line up against that line, and then just trim it down on the Capex. Just lining my A's up, lining my top up, making sure it's flush. There you go. Simple as that. Now I have noticed that on the initial glue up, this middle piece has just dropped down that way a little bit, and you can probably see it on that back piece. Not a lot, but I can also see that represented here and then on the top as well. Now I'm going to put the bottom piece on first. Glue, glue, glue. Glue down the length of that shelf will give us a fantastic joint. I'll put a couple of quick clamps on to clamp it down, and then I'm going to put some Bessey clamps on to pull these two ends in this direction, and that'll just take out that piece for me and get it all lined up. So let's do that bottom piece first and see how we get on. Make sure my orientation is correct. And I'm going to put a Bessey clamp across here and a Bessey clamp across here because there's some movement in this, and that'll just clamp it all straight for us. Let me show you. Now the quick clamp just ensures that it stays flush, otherwise, because I've got clamp pressure on the back, it could have the chance of pivoting, which I don't want. So that's looking pretty good there. So the centerpiece was actually down in this direction towards me because I've turned the unit round. So that's just pulled this end and this end towards me as well, and that's leveled everything up inside here, which is beautiful. And that's now perfectly flush with the top piece. I'm just going to put a clamp, a Bessey across here as well, just to keep the pressure in that direction. There you go, everything is now pulled tight. I'm now going to put a whole series of quick clamps down here to just make sure that this piece stays flush onto that back piece there. Now that was that little bit of movement I was talking about earlier on. So in theory, everything should now be bang on square. And I want to come in and check that. Beautiful. Oh, absolutely beautiful. 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 Yeah. Yep. Okay. Wow. So we're happy with that. And that's what I was talking about, because there's a slight bit of flex on this black piece of wood. Not a lot, but it can deflect a little bit. And even if this was not this Velcro out of it was a pine shelf or a thicker MDF shelf or a ply shelf, you're still going to get a little bit of movement in this direction until we have the back in place. So if you're not careful, and that had sagged down as it had in our case, and you put the back on and don't adjust it, your shelves will be out of square. So by putting this back piece on first, and I'm going to let the glue go off, I'm going to go away now and allow the glue to go off with everything nicely clamped here, these Bessey clamps pulling it all square for me, I'm guaranteed to be square because everything, all the joinery lines up. Good job. Good job. So the back's on, the top's on now. Once we've got that bottom brace in place, this squared up beautifully, so everything is really nice and square. So the back and the top is no harder than just gluing bits of wood together and clamping it down. Now it's a beautiful rigid construction and it's looking quite good. So the next thing I want to do is to get it ready for a couple of coats of Osmo. So I just want to sand it down. There's a few glue marks here and there that I'm not overly happy with, so I just want to bring those out and just general tidy up, and then we'll get this thing finished. Lovely. Now I've not killed myself on that sanding, I've just got it to the point where all the big obvious marks have gone. There's the odd stain here and there that another hour or so I could take out, but bearing in mind what it's for, to hold clamps and look pretty in the workshop, that's where I'm going to leave it. Everything is now down to 120, all the edges were done with 120, all the arches were broken in 120, all the profiles are 120, all the edge, all the faces, all the Velcro mats, all the joints inside, everything is now down to 120 grit, which is perfect for an oil like Osmo. This is Osmo, in fact the last bit of Osmo I've got in the workshop. This is just a clear satin, so it's got the oil and the wax inside, it gives a nice protection. I apply it with one of these Scotch-Brite white sponges, it just helps you to rub that into the grain, and then I wipe it off with a clean one of those. And that's pretty much it. And now you can see the effect that we were going for. I mean, I just love this contrast of the rich, deep black of Velcro mat and the golden tones of the pine coming through. I just think it looks really, really sweet, like a modern day version on, you know, farmhouse traditional. Love it, love it, love it, love it. I'm going to let that soak off for 10 minutes, just let that oil and wax penetrate into the wood, and then I'm just going to come in and give it a light buff with a clean cloth. And all I want to do there, just to make sure there's no pools, I can see pools here and there, certainly on the Velcro mat, just take out that pooling, spread it across, and then I'm going to leave it, not mess with it, just leave it alone for a couple of hours, and then I'll do one final coat and that thing is ready to go on the wall. And while that's drying, I'm going to go and clean out the area where we're going to mount it, take the old clamps into storage, and yeah, getting exciting. See you in a minute. So there you go, I've now mounted it on the wall and I've thrown the collection in and it looks pretty good, and I'm really, really pleased with this. It's just so easy to grab one of the clamps, go and get the job done, and when I've finished, I've got a nice neat space to store them all, and everything's stored with all the accessories at the top as well. Easy to get the clip clamps, they just quickly come out of here as well, and when I've finished, I've got that nice place to support them with that nice groove in there holding everything into place. I also designed it so it fit quite nicely behind my planer jointer, so it's a really good use of space in the small workshop. So the plans are available for this build, www.thewoodgrafter.com. Look for the YouTube bundle and you'll find the plans inside there. Feel free to use it, knock yourself out. I hope you found this useful. See you soon and stay safe. Take care.